Hello everyone, and welcome to the GTAC Tech Talk webinar on wireless lock implementation in Security Center. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Derek, and I'll be hosting the webinar for you. And we also have Abraham with us from the Genetec Technical Assistance Center, standing by to assist with any questions you may have during the webinar. If you do have any questions, you can just type them in the question box of the GoToWebinar console, and one of us will get back to you with an answer as soon as possible. In case we need to verify any information for your question, we'll make a note of it and get back to you via email as soon as we have an answer for you. Some of the questions and answers from the webinar will be posted on the GTAC Tech Talk section of the Genetec Technical Assistance Portal forums about a day or two after the webinar has finished. If you have any additional questions or comments on the webinar or the GTAC Tech Talk webinar series in general, you can post them in this section of the GTAP forum as well. All the videos of the previous webinars can be found by going to the Resources section, then go to Videos, and then go to the GTAC Tech Talk section on the side here. Now there's two ways that you can watch these. Either streaming in a browser window by clicking on this icon here, or you can download a zipped Windows media file by clicking on this icon right here. If you would like to receive emails concerning the latest additions to the Genetec Technical Assistance Portal, you can log into the GTAP, go into the My Account section here, go under Email and Notifications, and then from the Notifications section, just put a checkbox next to any of the subjects that you're interested in. To put a checkbox next to a subject, the frequency here will have to be set to daily or weekly. If you have it set to never, then the checkboxes underneath here will be grayed out. And of course, don't forget to hit the Submit button on the bottom to save any changes you've made on this page. Now before we get started, I wanted to talk a little about what we're trying to accomplish for this webinar. The primary goal of the webinar is to give you a better familiarity of what kinds of wireless hardware are supported in the Security Center and how to set it up. The number of wireless locks being installed in the field is steadily growing, so we also want to give you a good idea of how the locks are installed and used. By the end of the webinar, you should have a good idea of when you can use a wireless lock for a site, and what you'll need to get it set up and working. Going over the agenda, the first thing we're going to look at is a general overview of wireless locks, including any use cases and advantages or disadvantages to using them. We're going to go over the types of wireless hardware that are supported in Security Center after that. And then we'll go into the individual configuration of the Assa Abloy and Salto lock types. Finally, we have some troubleshooting tips and tricks for any common problems you might run into at the end here. And I just want to point out that if you need to go back and review the webinar, or if you do need to step away for a minute, we do include a table of contents here on the side now, and we do have a progress indicator, so you can always go back and watch the video once it's posted. And you can see what part we're in here if you need to fast forward and jump to a particular section. Okay, so before we get into the details of actually setting up a wireless lock, let's take a few minutes to talk about why you might want to use one in the first place. Just to give you a general idea of what kind of lock we're talking about, a wireless lock is one that communicates to the server using a wireless connection, either over a Wi-Fi network, or using a hub that has been wired to the Synergis master controller. Now it's not just the network communication that's wireless, the locks run on batteries in general, so the whole unit is self-contained. Just like wired locks, there are many different types of locks available. There are the traditional lock types, such as a mortise lock or a board lock, and locks for exit devices such as a crash bar or Rex. But there are also specific units that can be used on lockers or cabinets. Most have a key override option as well, so the lock can be opened with a key even when there's a problem with the batteries on the unit. Now let's take a quick look at some key differences between the Assa Abloy Wi-Fi locks, the Assa Abloy Aperio locks, and the Salto Solus locks. Now, if you want to see a full list of the features for each type, including any footnotes, just take a look at the integration guide for the lock that you're interested in. Now, in terms of the hardware used, the Assa Abloy Wi-Fi locks connect directly to the SMC, whereas the Aperio and Salus locks need to talk to a hub which is wired to the SMC. Looking at the communication protocol used, the Assa Abloy Wi-Fi locks go over a traditional IP network. The Aperio locks use a RS-485 connection from the hub to the SMC, and the Salus locks use either an IP or RS-485 connection from the hub to the SMC, depending on the type of hardware that you have selected. Now, this communication can be encrypted for the Salus locks as well. For the Assa Abloy Wi-Fi locks, encryption can be enabled between the lock and the network router, but there is no encryption available on the Aperio locks. Now, one of the main differences in operation between the lock types is how they work offline. The Wi-Fi locks work in autonomous mode here, and supervised mode as well. Sorry, if we take a look here. Where the lock makes the access decision, but it actually checks back with the SMC to see if this decision should be overridden by the current rules that are loaded on the SMC. Now, of course, there may be a little extra overhead for this, which can cause an unlock delay of maybe up to 15 seconds. Now, the Aperio and the Salus locks both run in dependent mode, and this is where the SMC makes all the access control decisions for it. Now, since these two lock types don't make their own access decisions, they're unable to run when offline. The Wi-Fi lock can run in autonomous mode, as we see here, to make its own access decisions, and it can store up to 2,400 credentials. Now, another difference is when the unit actually contacts the SMC. The Assa Abloy Wi-Fi locks will contact the SMC on a read, and if there is an unknown credential, door forced open, or door open too long event. The other two types here will contact the SMC on a read only. In terms of the scheduled contact, the Assa Abloy Wi-Fi locks do this at midnight UTC time by default. The Aperio locks can be set to between 1 and 60 minutes, and the Salus lock connects every 8 seconds. Battery checks are done on all three units, but the frequency changes for each one. When the lock loses power, it will go into fail secure mode, meaning the unit will remain locked by default. All three have different maximum credential lengths as well. Taking a look at how many interface modules we can use per SMC, we have 128 for the Wi-Fi units, and 64 for each of the Aperio and the Salus hardware types. For the Aperio units, we could put all 64 on one RS-485 channel on the SMC, but we do recommend spreading it out to use all 4 channels of the SMC instead, which would put 16 per channel. Now, the Salus hardware here, we can do a maximum of 16 units per channel on the SMC, totaling 64 units if we have one hub or router per channel on the SMC. Now, taking a look at the SMC features, in terms of hardware configuration, the nod definitely goes to the Aperio and Salus hardware here, as you can see. The Wi-Fi locks must be manually paired with the SMC. However, the Aperio and the Salus locks allow manual and automatic enrollment, but also support property configuration and configuration cloning as well. Now, taking a look at the I/O diagnostics here, this is basically the live monitoring of the inputs, the relays, and the readers. We're not able to see this information from the Wi-Fi locks, but we do get information for the Aperio and the Salus locks. The relays on the Aperio locks may take some time to respond based on the value the scheduled radio contact has been set to, and the Salus locks will only report values for inputs that are actually connected to a sensor. Now, one of the new features of the SMC is the ability to double swipe at a door to permanently lock or unlock a door until the next person double swipes it. This feature is available on the Aperio and the Salus locks only. Now, taking a look at the access control behavior, it's generally the same between the locks, where we can see that beeping is not supported on any functions, and interlocking is also not available. The Aperio locks can be configured to use card and PIN, or card only. You can see right there, that's the only one that can do that there. And the lock relay can also be configured on the Wi-Fi locks, as we can see. Those are the exceptions between the different types here. Now, in terms of security center features, a few important ones are event monitoring for the state of the unit, the low battery indicator, the door forced open events, and the door held open events. Now, the Aperio units can also detect if a deadbolt is in place and if the door is open or closed. Sorry, there we go. There's the deadbolt right there. Now, both the Aperio and the Salus units can report an event if a key was used to open the door as well. Now, some of the properties of the door can be pushed to the unit, but this varies greatly depending on the hardware used. The Wi-Fi locks can take the standard and extended grant time settings for the door, as well as the maintenance mode status, telling it if it should ignore the access events or not. The Aperio locks can take the standard and extended grant times, as well as the maintenance mode status, and as well most of the rec settings here as well. The Salus locks can be set to go into maintenance mode, but other things like the standard and extended grant times are not pushed to the unit from Security Center. Now, all three lock brands support unlock schedules. You can see here. But these will only be updated on the next radio contact for the Wi-Fi and the Aperio locks. If you're looking at doing anti-passback, this is only supported on the Aperio line of locks here. We can do all forms of anti-passback, such as soft, hard, strict, and we can use a timeout to forgive violations as well. Now, from a realistic standpoint, none of the units do zone management, as we can see down here. Now, we could configure a hardware zone using the inputs from the Salus unit, but there would be a significant delay that would most likely keep it from being really useful, and you'd probably want to use other hardware in that case. Now, one last thing to point out here, up here, is the reader shunting from the security desk, which is basically telling it to ignore the events here. This can be done from the Aperio and the Salus locks, but it's not possible from the Assa Abloy Wi-Fi locks. Now, once again, if you do need more information on a particular function, you saw there were some footnotes there. So if you want to see if it's supported or what those footnotes were for any restrictions, just take a look at the integration guide available on the GTAP for whatever type of unit that you are considering. Now that we know what the wireless locks can do, what's the differences between them, where would we want to use one? We could use a wireless lock pretty much anywhere we could use a wired version, but there are a few specific cases where it makes more sense to use the wireless ones. One of the first use cases would be where you have solid glass doors leading into an area, and you want to protect the area without ruining the look of the doors. So, using the wireless locks, you can secure the door without having a bunch of wires or wire covers showing, and everything will be contained in one unit without any external readers or things like that. We can also use wireless locks in other hard-to-reach places, such as a glass case or cabinet in the middle of a showroom at a retail location. There are a lot of different lock solutions, as we mentioned, including smaller locks that can be used on cases, server cabinets, lockers, and other enclosures like that. If you have a door that is away from the main network, you could also use wireless locks in that case as well, as long as it is within reach of one of the hubs or routers. So there is a recommended distance to keep the lock within the router. As long as it's within that range, we should be okay. So just for an example, if we have a series of maintenance sheds that are close to the main building, but we're still separate from it, you could place a hub near the outside wall and use the wireless locks in the sheds. This will keep you from having to run cables across outside to the sheds, which could get damaged over time. Just to even the playing field, let's take a look at some advantages and disadvantages of using wireless locks. So we'll start with the bad news first, and the first disadvantage is that the units are battery dependent, meaning you will have to have someone monitor and replace the batteries from time to time. How long they last will really depend on how much the lock is used and how often it is communicating with the hub or router. Now, another slight issue with this is that one side of the door will have the battery compartment, which could be tampered with, causing the lock to go into fail secure mode and stay locked. Fortunately, most of the units come with a key option, so it can be opened manually if needed. Another slight disadvantage is that some additional hardware is required for the Assa Abloy Aperio and Salto Solus locks, as you do need to hook up a hub or router for the units to communicate with. The Assa Abloy Wi-Fi locks don't require this extra hardware, but there is less flexibility in these unit types, as they are only for door locks, and they don't have the smaller cabinet or case locks available. Now, one last thing to mention is that since the locks are wireless, we do lose that instant feedback we get from the wired units. There will be some kind of delay between the event and when it is reported in Security Center. In some cases, the reporting is only done when the unit makes a radio contact to the main unit, causing delays in actions such as putting the door in maintenance mode. Alright, enough with the negative. Let's take a look at the advantages of using wireless units. The main advantage we have here is that the locks are easy to install. There are no door frame modifications needed since all the parts are contained around the lock. We have very little drilling or coring to do on the door, so there's less chance of making a mistake and turning the door into Swiss cheese. There's no need for any door wiring, specifically no power transfer hinges that might wear out and fail after a lot of physical wear and tear. Related to this, we don't need to mount a lot of extra hardware, like mag locks for instance, and we don't need any specialized hardware or training to install the wireless lock hardware. This will lower the chance of making any errors and improperly mounting a mag lock that might come loose a little bit later on. Now, since there is less hardware involved and it is easier to install, this will also lower your installation costs in the end. Now, we mentioned previously a few other advantages that we had, such as the ability to extend your access control system into hard-to-reach places, where wiring might be impractical, more flexibility in the types of installations, such as server cases or lockers, and that you can install a lock without ruining the look and style of a glass door. Alright, so let's take a quick look at some of the supported lock hardware and how the whole system works together for each type. Taking a look at the Assa Abloy Sargent and Corbin Russwin Wi-Fi locks first. Here's the list of tested and supported Wi-Fi hardware here. Now, there's a lot of different lock types to choose from here, but they're all door-mounted locks, and the cabinet options are not available at the moment. With this, there's no other hardware needed, as the unit connects over the wireless IP network to the SMC. Connection to the SMC is done using a discovery port, and we can tell the SMC to look over the network for any units on that port. We're going to take a look at that in a little bit more detail in just a couple of minutes. Now, moving on to the next set of wireless locks, let's take a look at the Assa Abloy Aperio line of hardware. Now the basic hardware that you're going to need is the AH30 hub, which is wired to a channel on the Synergis master controller and is used to communicate with the wireless locks themselves. Now we've tested a few different locks with the system, but other hardware can be used with the AH30 hub as well. For example, we have tested the PR100 models here and the K100 and KS100, which are cabinet and server cabinet locks. But there are other models that do work with the Aperio system that may work as well. Now in terms of the hubs, we can have 8 of them connected to each SMC channel, and up to 8 locks can be connected per hub. As we mentioned previously, if you're going to be putting a lot of locks on the SMC, it would be a good idea to spread them out over the 4 available SMC channels. The last set of hardware is the Salto Solus wireless lock system. Now this is a little different from the Aperio system, as our first point of contact for the SMC is the Solus router. Now this can either connect on a channel on the SMC using an RS-485 cable, or we can use a PoE router to go over the IP network. From here we need to set up and connect the nodes on the system, which are used to talk to the wireless locks themselves. Now currently we have tested the XS4 series of wireless locks for use with the Solus system. Similar to the Aperio system, we can have 64 interface modules or locks connected to one SMC. If you're using the PoE router, which has a different model number than the RS-485 model, all 64 locks can be used with that router. If you're using the RS-485 router, you're going to need to have 1 router per channel and a maximum of 16 locks per router. Okay, so let's get into some of the actual configuration now, starting with the Assa Abloy Sargent and Corbin Russwin Wi-Fi locks. The first thing we'll want to do is check the firmware on the actual lock hardware and make sure it's on something compatible with the SMC. Take a look in the integration guide for the Assa Abloy IP locks on the GTAP for the version of the SMC that you're using, and then within that guide verify the firmware version for the lock that you're using. When setting up the wireless locks, you're going to need to use the Assa Abloy NCT LCT software for configuring the network information and the lock information. If you need to upgrade the firmware, take a look in the user manual for the NCT LCT software for instructions on doing so. Now before we add the lock to the SMC, we need to do some configuration on the lock side first. So to do this, we need to use the NCT or Network Configuration Tool software to create a configuration file for use with the lock. Now just take a look at the manual that comes with the NCT for more detailed instructions, but basically you're going to need to provide the software with the IP address of the SMC, which will be used as the host address, and also set the communication port that will be used by the SMC to discover the unit. The default port that's set up in there is 2571. Once you have the configuration file created, install the batteries on the unit. The unit should beep, and then the lights will flash for a little bit, but once they've stopped, you can physically connect the unit to a workstation or other PC for programming. From here we use the LCT or Lock Configuration Tool software to connect to the lock. You may have to go to the settings from the file menu and set the port before connecting. From there we select the Configure Lock Set option and choose the configuration file that we created with the NCT previously. Now that we have the lock configured, we need to add it to the SMC that will be controlling it. We do this by putting the SMC into lock pairing mode and then activating the pairing mode on the lock unit itself. From the home page of the SMC, click on the Lock Pairing Mode function, which is under the Configuration section. Now it's going to bring up this page here. So the first thing we need to set here is the timeout value, or how long it will stay in the state of looking for locks. So make sure you give yourself enough time to activate the pairing function on the locks at the same time. In the ports list here, we just need to add the ports that we have used in the network configuration tool for all the locks that we have set up. If you're using multiple ports, you can keep adding them until all your ports are included in the list here. You can use the Add Locks Upon Discovery option here, but this will interrupt the pairing process every time a group of locks is added. Basically, you should only use this function if you need to start configuring the locks immediately after they're discovered. If you're using this option, you can also change how long to wait before it considers the discovery finished and adds the lock to the system. So basically, by setting this time here, it's going to wait 30 seconds, the default value here, until it doesn't find any more units, and then it'll consider that group done and it'll add them into the system. Once you have all the settings configured, hit the start button on the bottom here, and it will go into discovery mode until the timeout time is reached. Now please note that once we're doing this, it will disconnect from the SMC will disconnect from the access manager. Now while we're in this mode here, while we're in the pairing mode, on the wireless locks that we have configured, push the COM reset button on the back panel of the unit, and that's going to trigger a connection to the SMC. So basically the SMC is going to be looking over the network for anything on that discovery port, and we're basically pushing that button to have the unit tell the SMC, I'm right here, pick me up, kind of thing. So any locks that are discovered will show up in the list here, and once all the locks are in there, you can click on the stop and save button right here. At this point, the locks will be added to the SMC, and it will reconnect to the access manager at this time. If you do want to quit without adding the units, you can hit the cancel button. If you're using the Add Locks Upon Discovery option, some of the discovered locks will already have been added to the SMC in most cases. Now from here we go back to the home menu of the SMC, and we can go into the hardware section, and we can verify that the locks have been added. So you can verify the information for the actual unit from the Properties tab of the unit. Now in this case, this is when I went in right afterwards, and we can see the channels that I added here, but we don't have anything listed at the moment. So don't panic if you see this. It does take a little bit of time, so just hit the refresh button after about 2 minutes, and the units should show up under their respective channels. Units showing up in red are normal, as they're not in constant communication with the SMC. Now for any units that aren't showing up at all, open up the LCT or lock configuration tool and use the verify connection to host command to see if the unit can contact the SMC. Check the network settings and the wireless communication if you're unable to see the SMC from the lock unit. So that's really all you need to do in order to add the Wi-Fi units to the SMC, and they should be available for use within Security Center at this point. Now if you're setting up the hardware in a lab environment before moving it on site, don't forget to remove the batteries before packing everything back up. It would also be a good idea to set up all the hardware and make sure it connects before installing it in the door. If you can't do this in a lab, then do it on site before the actual hardware installation. Take a look at the documentation that came with the lock for the actual hardware install, but in general there are very few holes to drill, mostly just for the cables connecting the modules on each side. You just need to make sure that the lock is configured to have the right orientation. So the inside has the battery compartment, and the outside has the lock reader, like in this case, and the latch is facing the right way as well. These are actual diagrams that are taken from the Assa Abloy documentation. So they are very detailed. As you can see, you just need to connect the cables on each side, secure the loose wires, and pretty much you're good to go. So that the guide that you get with the lock should give you all the hardware information that you need for the actual physical installation. Now let's take a look at the Assa Abloy Aperio configuration. I mean, take a look at the guide for the detailed steps, but the basic steps, first of all, is that you need to set the EAC address from 1 to 15 on the back of the hub using the dip switches that you can see from the back. Now we can daisy chain hubs together, but each one must have its own address. So you can see here we've got the dip switches for the RS-485 addressing. Another thing you'll want to have on hand is the USB dongle from Aperio that's used for programming the unit. So at this point we need to power on the hub, and then I mentioned that USB dongle. We plug that into the computer that will be running the Aperio programming application software. That's what we're going to be using for the configuration. And then we need to install the USB dongle driver, which is the Tri-B bootloader. After that, we can install the APA, or Aperio programming application itself. And the first thing you're going to want to do is update the firmware on the hub and the locks. After that, we just need to connect to the hub. Now, to use the Security Center unlock schedules, we need to check the Enable Remote Open option. This is under the Remote Open section, and we need to ignore the default lock duration settings. Now, next we need to set the status report interval to 1 minute to minimize the lag between the start and end of unlock schedules and the time the actual schedule is in place. Now, if you're not using unlock schedules, we can increase this time interval to save on the battery life. So here we have it set to 1 minute. So basically, if we do a manual unlock, or if the unlock schedule kicks in, there may be up to a minute before it actually activates on the lock itself. So this means it will be making radio contact every minute, and like I said, if you're not using unlock schedules, you can increase this if you need to. Alright, our next step is to set the hub to use the secure radio communication, which is called customer mode. And then after that, we need to activate each wireless lock by presenting the card, pair it with the hub, and then we need to write down the EAC address associated with the lock. Now, if we want to find the EAC address of the hub that the lock is assigned to, we can do that by taking the remainder of the lock EAC divided by 16. So in this case here, just to give you a quick example, if we get an address back for the lock, it's got an EAC address of 36. We divide 36 by 16. The remainder is, of course, 2. The remainder is 4, it divides twice. And that means the hub EAC address for this lock will be 4. Now we also need to set the lock to use secure radio communication. The customer mode, we need to set that as well. Our next step is to actually pair the Aperio locks to the hub. So to connect it to the hub, we basically connect it to the RS-485 channel that we want. We connect the hub's A connector to the plus side of the channel, and the B connector to the minus side of the channel. Now, one other thing we will need to modify on the SMC is we need to set the local echo switches on the SMC to the on position for all channels. So if we look here, this is on the SMC on one of the boards here. There's the SW3, 4, 5, and 6 switches that you'll see, and we need to have that switch to the on position. These two are, this is channel A, B, and C and D over on this side. Okay, so our next step is to log into the SMC, go onto the web page, go into the hardware section and add the unit. So when we're adding the unit, we want to choose the Aperio hardware type. We need to select the channel that the hub is on and set Aperio as the module type. Now down below here we can either hit scan to enroll the units automatically, but if we know the lock EAC addresses, it might be faster to enroll them manually by entering the EAC numbers, like we have here. We just need to enter the address here and click on add, and just repeat that for each lock that we have on the system. Once we're done here, just click save, and then refresh to see the new locks on the system from the hardware page. Once we're finished here, we can just enroll the SMC unit in Security Center. Okay, now taking a look at the physical installation, we can see from the installation guide that we have here that we pretty much have the same configuration as the Wi-Fi locks. In the example shown here from the Aperio documentation, we have the mortise lock here, and we can see that we just need to drill the appropriate holes for the wiring, and we just need to set up the inside and the outside panels. That's the outside panel here, and we'll install the inside panel once we have the wires fed through like this, and pretty much we're good to go. As I mentioned before, just make sure that the latch is in the right orientation, but all that is really well laid out in the hardware documentation, so that should be fairly easy to note. And as well, that's the PR100 unit right here, mortise unit. For the KS100 cabinet lock, there's a couple of diagrams here. As you can see, it's very simple to install. Just put it in place, plug in the wire, put the panel back on. There's a few other steps, but the guide covers everything, and it's really easy to get going. Okay, our last hardware type here is the Salto Solus wireless locks. So let's take a look at how to set those up for use in Security Center. So to enroll the unit, basically you want to use the documentation and software that's provided by Salto to set up the nodes and doors, and then update the routers and initialize the locks. This is using the portable programmer device. Now you want to make note of the IP address of the router, which is the IP address and the port number, and for the RS-485 router, you want to know which SMC channel the router is connected to, and as well you want to make note of the lock information, so the router, the lock ID, and the door where it's installed. Now on the SMC unit, make sure we have all the local echo switches set to on, as we saw in the previous step, and then log into the SMC and go into the hardware section. So from here we hit the add button to add new hardware, and we're going to pick Salto as the hardware type. Then we want to select the channel being used, either IP or one of the RS-485 channels. So for the if you pick an IP channel here, put in the IP address that we have that we're using, and the port number being used by the router. If we're using one of the RS-485 channels, we enter the channel number right here. And then the next step is, of course, to select Solus Lock as the module type, and enable the encryption if we have an AES key right here. Now from here we need to add all the wireless locks connected to the router. If you know the lock ID, you can put it in the physical address and hit add to add it manually. You can also click on the scan button down here if you have a number of units to enroll, and it'll try to detect all of them. Each one must have a different physical address. Once you're done, just click save and then refresh the hardware page to see the new interface modules. Now, if you do have any trouble seeing any units, you can use the I/O diagnostics page on the SMC to test the unit to see if it's working. Now, once again, for the hardware, it's all fairly straightforward. So just take a look at the hardware documentation for the lock for the physical installation instructions. But they're pretty much just as straightforward as the previous one that we've seen. Alright, in our last section, let's take a few minutes to go over some tips and tricks for the wireless locks. Now, the first thing I want to let you know about is how to monitor the battery status of the Assa Abloy Wi-Fi locks. Now, each lock will have a virtual input created under the SMC called input battery failed. When the battery is low on the lock unit, this input will go into an active state. Now, there's a really easy way to check if the locks, or if any of the locks connected to an SMC unit are having battery issues. So first we want to open a system status task and choose to monitor the access control units. Now, from the list here, take a look for any SMC units that are in a warning state and are showing up in yellow. Look at the battery fail column here and see if we've got a checkbox under that particular column for that unit. Now, if there is, you just need to open an access control task and select the unit that had the battery fail notifications. We can see it's the same unit here. And then click on the Peripherals tab. Now, take a look for the input battery failed entity. If it's active, we can see right here, and we can see the input is active, and we know that this particular lock is the one that's having the problem and will need battery maintenance. Okay, we're going to talk about a few key known issues as of version 2.2 SR2 of the SMC. If you are on a previous version of 2.2 on the SMC and you are seeing an issue where the Assa Abloy Wi-Fi locks are not reconnecting after the SMC restarts, or you are not getting the access denied events from an IN120 lock unit, you're going to need to upgrade your SMC to 2.2 SR2 to resolve those issues. Now, there are a couple of issues with the Assa Abloy Wi-Fi locks that we need to make a note of. First, you may sometimes see the door open too long event reported twice. In a case like that, just take a look at the timestamp, and if it is too close, just ignore the second one. The next thing to make a note of is that the lock relay delay does not take effect for the Wi-Fi locks. The door will open, or the door will lock right after it opens, even if you do have a delay set in there. So for now, just make sure that any doors that will be using Wi-Fi locks don't need to use the lock delay setting. One last thing for the Wi-Fi locks is if the unit is syncing card holders while you get a door forced open event, it will not report the event until the next time it makes a connection with the access manager. Looking at the Assa Abloy Aperio locks, there is only one known issue for them at the moment. Using a key to override the lock usually will trigger an input on the Aperio and Salus locks, but on the PR100 I-Class V2 model, you won't get any event to indicate this. Now, of course, that doesn't restrict the functionality. You can still use the key, you just won't get a record of it in Security Center. Now, the only problem you might encounter when using the Salus units is in the SMC web portal. When you're selecting the physical address when adding a unit, the message that it gives you is incorrect. The correct values for an RS-485 router are from 1 to 16 and from 1 to 64 for the PoE routers. Changing the number works just fine. It's only the message that's displayed that's incorrect, and that's going to be fixed in a future release. A quick troubleshooting tip when using the Salus locks. If you have to change the battery on the lock, make sure you reinitialize the lock and restart the router. Now, just to minimize the impact on any other locks connected to the router, it would probably be a good idea to have a standard battery maintenance time that's outside of the peak hours. One thing I want to point out is how the Aperio locks handle the REX input. The Aperio hardware takes care of controlling the REX, so make sure to turn off the Unlock on Request to Exit option for any doors that are using an Aperio lock. The REX still needs to be configured on the door side as the input REX here, but you don't need to have it actually active as we saw to unlock on request to exit. Now another tip that also concerns the Aperio locks is specifically if you're using a card and pin. The default timeout, access timeout value here is 5 seconds, and that's really not long enough, so we should set the access timeout value to longer than that in your reader settings. If you're making any changes to the status interval time on the Aperio locks, make sure it's done on both the lock and the communication hub as well. The time should be consistent on all locks connected to the same hub, and generally the interval should be shorter on the lock so we don't get any intermittent offline situations. When upgrading the firmware on an Aperio system, always make sure you do the hub first and then the locks. The firmware itself may not be backwards compatible, and if the lock is done first, it may not be able to communicate with the hub. Also, when you're using the Aperio programming application software to do a firmware upgrade, make sure you disconnect the hub from the SMC first. Now, one other thing to note about the Aperio locks is that there's a tamper sensor on the battery cover. So if you remove the battery cover, the tamper will be activated and the door will lock and not respond to cards. Once the cover has been replaced and the tamper event resolved, the lock will go back to its previous state. As we can see, the Aperio hub does have a status LED on it. You can just take a look at the guide for more information on what the different color and blink states the LED can display, what the different ones mean. But generally you should see it as a solid green light like this when it's online and correctly added to the system. I just want to take a second to go over some very quick Aperio troubleshooting question and answers. So in the first one, if we have a lock that's not unlocking on an unlock schedule, we're going to want to ensure that the remote open option is enabled in the hub, and that the option status report interval has been changed to 1 minute in the lock configuration. Next one, if the lock pairing fails on the Aperio lock with the Aperio programming software, the first thing to do is make sure the lock is not already paired with another hub. If that's the case, then you need to unpair it with the other hub first, so the lock can only be paired with one hub at a time. Now in the case where the hub is broken and needs to be replaced, you're going to need to pair it with the new hub. The way to do that is like basically you'd want to unpair it usually, but in the case where the hub is broken, obviously you can't do that. So basically power down the lock and power it back up again, and you should be able to pair it with the new hub at this time. Now if you're not able to upgrade the firmware on the lock, or you're getting a password error when trying to start the upgrade, you may need to upgrade the Aperio programming software, and that might resolve the issue. There may be a new version of that available on the website. If you're actually having trouble getting the Aperio programming application to start, try to reinstall the driver and retry starting the software again. Alright, so that's the end of the tips and tricks, and this concludes the webinar for today. We're going to leave the session active for about another 10 minutes or so in case you have any additional questions for Abraham or myself. In case you do need to review the webinar or know someone who would like to watch it, we're going to have the video of the webinar posted in the video section of the GTAP within the next couple of days, probably by tomorrow, if not Monday by the very latest. If you have any comments or feedback on the webinar, we'd really love to hear them. Once we end the webinar, or if you close the webinar session, you're going to be presented with a very short survey Just 3 short questions, and we'd really greatly appreciate it if you could just take a minute and give us a little feedback on the webinar today. Now, if you do think of anything you'd like to ask after the webinar is finished, or you do have any other comments, you can leave those in the GTAC Tech Talk section of the GTAP forum. There is a forum thread for this webinar. You can just leave it in there. And we're going to also have the general questions and answers from today's webinar in that forum thread, as well as links to the videos once they're completed. And again, that will be posted very soon. We're also going to put a link to the PDF version of the presentation slides that we used today. That'll be in the forum as well, so that's a good place to look for more information. So on behalf of myself and everyone at the Genetec Technical Assistance Center, I'd like to thank you very much for attending the webinar today. I hope it was useful for everyone, and we hope you all have a great day. Thank you.